Hi, on to the non-investment topics. The topic for today is wishful thinking. There are two sides to wishful thinking, but first let's define wishful thinking. Wishful thinking occurs when one has beliefs that are based on thoughts that are pleasing to the individual, but with little or no evidence of reality or rational thought. It's what one would like to be true, as some form of self-gratification, instead of what is likely to be true or to happen. As a mathematician, I tend to quantify thoughts. So to quantify wishful thinking in probabilistic terms, I consider wishful thinking to be things that have zero chance of happening, or at most the longest of long shots. Let's give a sports example of wishful thinking with people rooting for their favorite teams. Suppose you have a favorite baseball team that has struggled the last few years. A new year starts and hopes are high. Suppose you wish that your team would win every game. So suffice it to say that that is extreme wishful thinking, borderline delusional. If your hope is that the team can win 110 games, this is too a long shot, but not a zero shot, as teams have won 110 games in a season. So this is wishful thinking with long odds. Finally, suppose you merely wish for your team to win 90 games. Then this would be a reasonable event and not necessarily wishful thinking. The point I'm making is that there are degrees of wishful thinking ranging from impossible to a slim, modest chance of happening. If your team is one of the best teams and is estimated at having a 30% chance of being the best team, being the champion, then expecting this or hoping for it is not wishful thinking, problematically speaking. And since the reality is that this could happen and wouldn't surprise many if it did happen, I would not classify this as dangerously fooling yourself, wishful thinking. Okay, so let's establish the impact of wishful thinking. I believe that in most cases, wishful thinking is not a good thing. The first problem is that often individuals miscalculate the odds of things happening and can dramatically overestimate the likelihood of a positive happening, which is the common mistake of an optimist. The second case occurs while someone might correctly ascertain the long shot possibility, but optimistically hope that the long shot materializes, positively speaking. It's kind of hoping to get lucky. So when one engages in wishful thinking, in either case, one enters a dream or fantasy state of mind. Consider the possibility of winning one of those monster lottery jackpots and people hoping for it. Some plan whole futures based on that. The problem occurs when reality kicks in and when the expected wishful thinking outcome does not materialize, frustration occurs, and in the worst cases, depression. Now, in our illustrative example of sports dreams, there are not necessarily significant negative consequences of wishful thinking beyond disappointment. However, when people make choices and base courses of actions on wishful thinking, then the consequences of putting too much hope in a long shot might have disastrous consequences. When wishful thinking figures into things like education, employment, choices of friends, romantic relationships, recreations, vacations, expenditures, and investments, and a host of others, the results are often bad. Life is difficult enough even when making reasonable choices. But when you ignore the risks of long shots and the inevitable consequences, you set yourself up for a tough time and a tough life. There are lots of people who play the lottery with their food and rent money, with the dream of hitting the big one. And when they don't, they are paying a hefty price. We can root for long shots events, but we should not risk too much on them. If a woman commits to a man who cheats on her all the time, what is the risk of marrying that person? Thinking that in doing so everything will be fine is likely wishful thinking. If someone flunks biology and chemistry in high school and does only a little better in college, does it make sense for that person to aspire to be a doctor? The success and glamour and pleasures associated with some undertakings often clouds people's understanding of the risk of their courses of action when they're based on wishful thinking. So does this mean we should not have hopes or ambition? Not at all. It just means that we need to be sensible and realistic in our analysis of potential outcomes, and if we are ignorant about the real odds of favorable outcomes, or if we are cognizant of them but deliberately choose to do things with the high risk of failure, we become a slave to our wishful thinking, and then we inevitably suffer because reality always wins out in the end. There might be a few cases where wishful thinking is not a bad thing. In the sports example, you want to fantasize about the people and teams you root for, then there is no real negative consequences beyond unnecessary disappointment. But if we choose to gamble on our wishful thinking preferences, then the risk of personal damage are heightened. If one is fully aware of the long-shot nature of wishful thinking and is able to ascertain the risk associated with the likely unfavorable outcomes, and decide that the risks are reasonable and not very damaging, then one might take the chance. If people who are seemingly marginally qualified for a career in medicine or law or sports, they might feel the damage of pursuing a career in those disciplines and not succeeding is mild and acceptable and worth the risk because of the huge payoff if they buck the odds and succeed. But one need to be careful about this. Too much wishful thinking, especially when the odds are long, will confuse our lives and inhibit progress and production. On one hand, one person has to become LeBron James, but there are millions who will have liked to become a LeBron James or a person of that stature and don't and can't. So we can have our hopes and dreams, but if we commit too much time and capital to real long odds happenings and keep doing that, that is a bad path to go down. So be careful with your wishful thinking. Thank you very much.